The Barbary Corsairs were some of the most feared pirates in history. From their naval bases in North Africa, they terrorized seafarers and inhabitants of the Mediterranean coast. They robbed valuable goods and abducted thousands of people to sell into slavery. The Barbary Corsairs sailed as far as Newfoundland, Canada, played a crucial role in naval battles such as the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, and fought alongside the Ottomans in amphibious operations such as the Siege of Malta. Let's get to know these dreaded sailors, delve into the intricacies of their daily operations, and explore how they became a formidable naval power. The Mediterranean Sea, with its numerous islands, fertile coasts and rich harbors, was a hub of trade in the Middle Ages. It also served as the backdrop for an age-old conflict between Muslims and Christians, which both sides considered a holy war. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the protagonists of this war in the Mediterranean were the Ottoman Empire and Spain, later the Habsburgs. Both were on the advance. The Spanish kingdoms pushed the Muslims out of the Iberian Peninsula during the final phase of the Reconquista, while the Ottoman Empire conquered Constantinople in 1453, then pushed farther and farther west by both sea and land. This ongoing state of war was the perfect breeding ground for piracy. European rulers were not above enlisting pirates to do their bidding, occasionally hiring one of the independent groups of Corsairs to support their fleets or harass their rivals at sea. Some of these Corsair groups relocated their bases to the coast of North Africa, which at the time was a relatively poor and poorly controlled area notorious for piracy. This region, known today as Maghreb, was then called the Barbary Coast, after the indigenous peoples of the region, the Berbers. It was from this coast that the Barbary Corsairs earned their name. In 1492, Spain conquered the Emirate of Granada, the last Muslim stronghold on the Iberian Peninsula. This caused a mass exodus of people fleeing to North Africa, and gave the Corsairs an enormous pool of unemployed, uprooted people from which to recruit. Many of these displaced people joined the Corsairs, hoping to exact revenge on the Spanish. Among those who helped the refugees cross the Strait of Gibraltar was a man called Baba Oruç, or Barbarossa, as he was known among the people of Western Europe. Barbarossa was born on the Greek island of Lesbos, made a career in the Ottoman navy, and eventually became a Corsair. He quickly made a name for himself and was soon joined by adventurers from all over the Mediterranean. He and his youngest brother, Hayreddin, became known as the Barbarossa Brothers. Together, they laid the foundation for the rise of the Barbary Corsairs. While the Barbarossa Brothers expanded their pirate empire from their base on the island of Jerba, the Spaniards continued their advance into North Africa. Between 1497 and 1510, Spanish troops conquered important ports, including Melilla, Merj el-Kebir, Tripoli, Bejaia, and Algiers. The desperate ruler of occupied Algiers soon besieged the Barbarossa brothers for help. They gladly came to his aid in 1516, but after expelling the Spaniards, Oruç kept the city for himself, unseating the ruler and making Algiers his new base. This aggravated the Spaniards and set off a series of conflicts. The Corsair extended their sphere of influence inland and conquered Miliana, Medea, Tenes, and Tlemcen. This heightened the pressure on the Spanish as it severed their supply routes to their port city of Oran from the hinterland. In response, Charles V, the King of Spain and soon to be Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, sent an army to recapture Tlemcen in 1518. Oruç Barbarossa was cut down as he defended the city. This left Oruç's brother, Hayreddin, in charge of Algiers. Seeking to expand his power, he approached Sultan Selim I, offering to make Algiers a subject state of the Ottoman Empire in exchange for troops to repel the Spaniards. At the time, the Ottoman Empire only extended as far as Egypt, so this was quite an appealing offer for the Sultan. He accepted, sent 6,000 soldiers, and appointed Hayreddin as Bey, or governor, of the new province. With this imperial backing, Hayreddin consolidated his influence on the Barbary coast and transformed Algiers into an important naval base. With the Sultan's permission, Hayreddin escalated the Holy War to the entire Mediterranean. Soon he was as dreaded and infamous as his brother had been. He plundered the Balearic Islands, Sardinia, Sicily and Calabria, and was so successful that in 1533 Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent made him admiral of the Ottoman fleet and chief governor of North Africa. 8 months later, Hayreddin Barbarossa launched an attack on Spanish-held Tunis, but was unable to hold it when Emperor Charles V counterattacked the following year. However, Hayreddin was soon back to expanding his fleet, which, according to the historian Adrian Tinniswood, was one of the largest naval powers in the Mediterranean, numbering over 150 ships and around 30,000 men. To put this into perspective, at the naval Battle of Lepanto in 1571, about 220 Ottoman ships clashed with around 200 vessels from the Holy League. With a force this massive, Hayreddin's power was without comparison. He plundered the coast of Spain and even defeated a Spanish fleet under the famous admiral Andrea Doria in the 1538 Battle of Preveza. When Hayreddin Barbarossa retired to Istanbul in 1545, he handed command over to his son Hassan. He left behind not only a group of well-organized and experienced Corsairs, but also an Algiers that was flourishing thanks to piracy and its status as a strong strategic base for the Ottoman Empire in the Western Mediterranean. But before we continue, a big shout out to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. Do you also feel the itch to rewatch your favorite movie from time to time? Everybody has a comfort movie, I think. But when you look for it on Netflix, you usually see this. It means Netflix probably has the movie you want, but it is not available in the country you live. Just like Netflix, other subscription services also do that, which basically means you pay for the whole subscription but only ever get to see a part of all the movies they actually have. With ExpressVPN, I can change my location to anywhere in the world with just one click, and basically unlock thousands of movies and TV shows. If I go and look online, it tells me exactly which country to connect to be able to watch the movie I want. This is to say that if Lord of the Rings is not available on Netflix in Switzerland, I just switch to Japan and there it is. I tried ExpressVPN for a while in the last weeks, and in my experience it is fast with never any buffering or reduced quality. It also keeps your data private and if enabled, blocks annoying trackers and advertisements. A VPN is just a quality of life improvement. If you want to give ExpressVPN a shot yourself, go to expressvpn.com/Sandroman and get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN free. Among the men who had fought at Hayreddin's side was a certain Dragut, known as the Drawn Sword of Islam. Some years later, he was appointed admiral of the Ottoman fleet by Suleiman and took up the fight against the Knights Hospitaller, a knightly order of Christians. The members of this order were some of the most notorious Christian Corsairs, known for hunting Ottoman ships as privateers. In essence, they were the counterpart to the Barbary Corsairs. In 1551, Dragut plundered the island of Gozo off Malta, the main settlement of the Knights Hospitaller. After enslaving the island's population, he sailed south and attacked Tripoli, which the Hospitallers had used as a base in the eastern Mediterranean for over 20 years. Once conquered, the city became an Ottoman province under the rule of Dragut, who made it his new base. From there, he continued to fight the Knights Hospitaller and their Christian allies. He plundered the west coast of Italy and defeated a fleet under the admiral Andrea Doria sent by Philip II at Gerba in 1560 with Ottoman support. In 1565, with the support of an Ottoman army, he even attacked the island of Malta. This second visit to Malta turned out badly for Dragut. He was killed by a cannonball during the siege of the Knights Hospitaller stronghold. 9 years later, Kilic Ali Pasha, Dragut's former deputy, again conquered Tunis, and this time the empire held on to it. This finally settled the question of who controlled North Africa, as Tunis, Tripoli and Algiers, though technically independent, were now all under Ottoman rule. Even Muslim Morocco supported the Ottomans. These Barbary states formed a kind of symbiosis with the privateers. Regular soldiers joined the Corsairs' raids, equipped with weapons supplied by the state arsenals. In return, the Corsairs helped protect the cities and surrounding areas, and brought trade goods and slaves to the markets. The Corsair spoils and the income from the slave trade financed the construction of public buildings, such as mosques and port facilities, and contributed to the prosperity of the inhabitants. The activities of the Corsairs soon became so important that the Barbary coast, quote, had nothing to sell but its prowess at piracy. Tunis, Tripoli and Algiers thus were veritable Corsair cities, All three were ruled by a governor appointed by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. This governor was free to rule, but was required to coordinate matters of foreign policy with the Sultan and pay him an annual tribute. On matters of seafaring and privateering, he was counseled by the representatives of the Taifa al-Rais, a kind of corporation of the Corsairs which gave them great influence over the ruler. The members of the Taifa al-Rais formed a parallel society centered around the harbor. This society included men from all walks of life, from simple sailors to influential nobles. The Taifa planned raids, kept records of investments and profits, and organized the sale of booty in the Muslim and Christian ports in the Mediterranean. At the head of the Taifa was the local admiral, or Capudan Pasha, who coordinated the activities of the fleet, including those of the Corsairs, from an office at the port. Before a Rais, which means captain, went on a raid, he had to obtain permission from the Capudan Pasha in form of a letter of marque. With this document in hand and the destination fixed, he hoisted the green flag of the Muslim privateers and set sail. The Corsairs usually operated in small groups of a few hundred to a few thousand men on a handful of ships. Only when they supported the Ottomans in a major campaign, such as the Battle of Lepanto, did they form larger fleets. In these cases, they were often led by the Capudan Pasha himself, for example Uluç Ali at Lepanto. This battle, in which the Holy League delivered an unexpected defeat to a much larger Ottoman fleet, showed that the Corsair navies were so well structured, organized and coordinated that they could easily compete with other fleets of the time. The crew of a Corsair ship came from very diverse backgrounds. In the 16th century, the captain, who was appointed by the owner of the ship, was usually an Ottoman. However, in the 17th and 18th centuries, an increasing number of captains were from other Muslim states or even Christian renegades. It's difficult to determine where the crew members were from, as there are no crew lists. Eyewitnesses at the time reported that they came from the North African coast, the Ottoman Empire, and various Christian states. Despite their differences, few quarrels broke out among the crews, because privateering formed a melting pot. All the men on board shared the goal of making profit, and knew they had to work together to achieve it. In addition, most men were proud to be Corsairs. Apart from the crew, most ships were manned by janissaries and other soldiers, who were on board only as fighters. The Corsairs had favored hunting grounds, depending on their bases. There was no clear division, but each Barbary state focused on different areas. The trade routes from east to west, bottlenecks such as the Strait of Bonifacio between Sardinia and Corsica, and important passages like the Strait of Sicily were particular popular targets. In addition to targeting ships, the Corsairs also focused on the coasts, where the most sought-after prize could be found in great numbers: people. Trafficking in humans was extremely profitable, because the Corsairs demanded high ransoms for rich prisoners and sold the poorer ones as slaves. At the time, the slave trade was a thriving business, with slave markets in almost all major port cities. Robert Charles Davis, an expert on the Mediterranean slave trade, estimates that over 1 million European Christians were sold in the slave markets of North Africa between 1530 and 1780. Although such figures must be taken with a grain of salt, they certainly provide an indication of the extreme extent of the slave trade at the time. In attacking ships and coasts, the Corsairs relied heavily on the element of surprise. When they attacked a target on land, a harbor town, for example, they secretly surrounded it at night, surprised the inhabitants, and drove them into the harbor. If they planned to plunder the entire region, the Corsairs sometimes occupied a fortified harbor as a strategic base, from which they conducted raids into the hinterland. The coastal inhabitants of the Mediterranean tried to protect themselves by building watchtowers, fortifying their towns, or simply moving inland. As a result, entire coastal regions were depopulated to the point that the Corsairs had difficulty finding suitable targets. The situation was different with ships. The Corsairs also used ambushes to attack ships, for example by suddenly emerging from the cover of a bay. If there was no suitable hiding place nearby, they often tried to deceive their prey, for example by pretending to be Christian merchants. Once the targeted ship was within range, they would hoist the Corsair flag and attack. Their aim was to scare the ship's crew into surrendering, so that they could take over the ship, people and cargo undamaged. Showing their flag or firing a few warning shots was often enough to make a ship surrender. Most sailors gave up when the Janissaries entered the enemy deck. Nobody wanted to mess with the Sultan's fearsome elite soldiers. However, some crews put up a fierce fight, hoping the Corsairs would turn away and look for an easier target. Once a ship was captured, the Corsairs put the passengers and crew in chains and transported the entire plunder to their home port. When the ship had returned, the spoils were divided. The sale of the captured ships, goods and slaves, and the ransom of wealthy prisoners was organized by the Capudan Pasha and his officials. A share was paid to the governor, usually 10 to 20%. The customary deductions were made to pay for the expenses such as the upkeep of the port, and a portion was paid to the marabots, Islamic religious teachers. The remainder was split between the crew and the investors. In addition to the owner of the ship, these often included other wealthy men who had helped finance the venture. The crew's share was divided among the sailors and soldiers according to rank and merit. The division of spoils was at the heart of being a Corsair. Although it is tempting to view piracy in the Mediterranean along religious lines, that is, Barbary Corsairs hunting Christians and Christian Corsairs hunting Muslims, this would be an inaccurate characterization of the phenomenon. Ideology and religion certainly played a role, and raids on people of the same religion were rarely, if ever, authorized. But the main driving force was profit. This is also why the Corsairs did not limit themselves to attacking the ships they were supposed to. They were not only privateers, they were pirates. For them, however, this distinction was probably irrelevant. They saw themselves as part of the complex economic network of the Mediterranean, as working men pursuing an honorable trade. Indeed, Christian and Muslim merchants appreciated the opportunities they offered. They could sell their goods in large ports such as Amsterdam, and many wealthy businessmen invested in their ventures. Ultimately, being a Corsair was more about business than about religion or national interests. The activities of the Barbary Corsairs reached their peak in the early 17th century, experiencing a renewed surge when the conflicts following the Reformation caused numerous refugees to flee to North Africa, especially Spanish Moriscos, Muslims who had converted to Christianity, but were nevertheless expelled in 1609. In addition, after the Battle of Lepanto and the English victory over the Spanish Armada in 1588, Spain lost its supremacy as a naval power to the Netherlands and England. Both states not only produced modern, more powerful fleets, but also a new kind of pirate who hunted for valuable goods in large, heavily armed sailing ships. These men often fought against Spain as privateers on behalf of England and the Dutch Republic. This continued until the beginning of the 17th century, when James I of England ended the war against the Spanish, and the Dutch Republic entered a truce with its old enemy. This political change, combined with the technical progress, left hundreds of privateers and sailors unemployed. In search of a new occupation, many moved to the Mediterranean to join the Barbary Corsairs. As a result, around 10,000 to 15,000 converted Christians were living in the Barbary states at the beginning of the 17th century, making up 1/3 of the Corsairs. One of these men was the sailor John Ward, also known as Jack Ward. Ward had been a privateer under Elizabeth I. When James I banned privateering, Ward joined the navy as a sailor, but the strict discipline didn't suit him, so he eventually deserted. After capturing a ship, he sailed to the Mediterranean and joined the Corsairs of Tunis, and from then on was known as Yusuf Rice. New arrivals like Ward not only filled the ranks of the Barbary Corsairs, but also brought new methods and means. The most important innovation was sailing ships. In the 16th century, the Corsairs, like everyone else in the Mediterranean, had mainly used galleys. Galleys were extremely reliable and maneuverable, but also had a short range and required an enormous number of rowers. The adoption of sailing ships increased the range of the Corsairs so dramatically that they extended their range into the Atlantic, carrying out raids in England, Iceland, and even Newfoundland. The number of recorded attacks exploded. According to the historian Robert Antony, the Corsairs captured 447 Dutch, 193 French, 120 Spanish, and 56 German ships between 1613 and 1621 alone. Ironically, it was precisely this success that brought down the Corsairs. Toward the end of the 17th century, they became such a threat that the rulers of Europe could no longer ignore them. To protect themselves, they began to broker treaties with the Corsairs. In return for a certain sum, the Corsairs would agree to leave their ships and coasts alone. This protection money made up for the fact that the Corsairs now had fewer targets to choose from, but it led to an overall decline in Corsair activities. However, this also had consequences. States without a treaty became even more sought-after targets. One of these was the young United States of America. After winning independence from England in 1776, it was no longer included in England's treaties. As a result, American shipping to Europe came under attack. However, the Americans were the first to seek a solution other than paying protection money. They adopted a carrot and stick method, conducting punitive expeditions, then paying compensation to restore peace. In 1794, for example, America negotiated a treaty with Algiers, in which it promised to pay $642,500 for the liberation of prisoners, plus an annual tribute of $21,600. Just 7 years later, in the American Tripolitan War, it tried to forcibly impose peace on its own terms. This time, it actually succeeded, and after a 4-year war of attrition, Tripoli reluctantly signed a peace treaty. 10 years later, in the 1815 American-Algerian War, the Americans similarly forced Algiers to sign a peace treaty. These two conflicts are collectively known as the Barbary Wars, and were recently dubbed America's first wars against terrorism. The Barbary Wars heralded the end of the Corsairs. European powers also abandoned the protection money approach and took military action against the Corsairs. After the Napoleonic Wars, various powers sent fleets to the coast of North Africa with mixed success. In 1816, an Anglo-Dutch fleet sank the entire Algerian fleet and bombarded the city for several hours. But it was only when a French army occupied Algiers in 1830 that the era of the Barbary Corsairs finally came to an end.